Joining me now on the phone is Jeffrey McCausland, CBS News national security consultant and retired U.S. Army colonel. He was also director of defense policy and arms control on the National Security Council staff in the White House. Colonel, thank you so much for being with us.
Elaine, it's great to be with you.
So President Trump said that this operation started 2 weeks ago. What type of planning goes into this type of mission?
Well, the first thing you have to do is track the target. And we knew with the case of Osama bin Laden that it was long, extending intelligence operations that identified this one courier. We tracked that particular guy, and over time, his movements led us to bin Laden. I think in this particular case, that was probably very similar. Al-Baghdadi was well known for being very severe about his own personal security, moved an awful lot, always wore a suicide vest. And a lot of the remarks the president made, I think, suggest that there must have been some kind of a human intelligence as well as a signal and aerial intelligence of this particular area that allowed us to identify where in fact he was. The second thing I find interesting, the president said was planned over a couple of weeks. At the same time, General Mazloun, who is the head of the Syrian Democratic Forces, has been speaking out on Twitter saying that, no, this was in cooperation with them, and it's ongoing for up to 5 months in terms of identifying this location, identifying Baghdadi, and conducting this operation in Idlib province, though, of course, the operation itself was solely American.
So what do we know about the region where he was found, Idlib province in Syria?
Well, Idlib was an area that really ISIS had not had a presence, and frankly, it is the last large province still under control of so-called rebels, and there's an expected, quite frankly, offensive by the Russians and the Syrian government in that area in the very near future, I believe. It had been an area where rebel groups supported by ISIS, or supported by al-Qaeda, I should say, had been operating as well as others. So there's speculation of why would Baghdadi be there? Well, a place we might not think to look for him, number one. Number two, was he trying to use that as a place to then move out of the country, perhaps onto Turkey or elsewhere? Had there been now, and this happens with terrorist organizations, because al-Qaeda and ISIS had actually fought against each other, had they met some modus vivendi, where now we're actually seeing perhaps cooperation between ISIS and al-Qaeda. We may know more about that if any of the information is released on the intelligence that was gained in this particular raid, which could be very important, or interviews of those who were captured in that compound.
Well, the president, during his remarks, thanked Russia, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and the Kurds. You mentioned General Mazloun, but what do you make of that, the fact that the president went through and listed essentially these countries and the Kurds as well, which, as you know, has really had such a sort of complicated history here, especially in recent weeks?
Yeah, for the Kurds, it was interesting, though. He seemed to not emphasize them as much as the Russians and others. And it's important, I think, to remind people that the Kurds were our principal allies in the fighting against ISIS and may have lost up to 12,000 killed in action in the fighting that liberated that portion of northeastern Syria that they occupied and basically ended that geographic caliphate. Second thing I think it tells us, of course, is, as the president said, the hour-and-a-half helicopter flight into the target area was probably the most dangerous part of the mission, probably suggesting those aircraft had to traverse at very low levels territory controlled by the Russians, territory controlled by the Turks, potentially territory controlled by the Syrian government itself. And then finally, as far as Iraq is concerned, obviously we don't know exactly where these special operations forces staged from. My guess would be from Iraq, perhaps moving into the areas controlled by the U.S., in the very eastern portion of Syria, and then on to the target area.
So Baghdadi may be gone, but the threat of ISIS still looms. How does the United States maintain a strategic partnership in the region without necessarily having as many troops on the ground in Syria?
Yeah, that will be very difficult because in many ways the United States walking away very precipitously, I think, has suggested to people in the region that we're out, and that's what the president has said, and now the Russians are the principal external major power that will decide how things occur. The real ceasefire that's still now trying to get into effect along the border was really created in a meeting between President Erdogan of Turkey and President Putin of Russia in Sochi, Russia, a few days ago, with the United States having no direct participation at all. And the president's strategy, President Trump, on Syria has zigzagged from we're all going to leave. Now a portion of the force is actually going to come back into Syria, perhaps augmented by heavy mechanized forces or even tanks to secure the oil fields. and he talked about that in his remarks today following the announcement of al-Baghdadi's death. But it's interesting to me, the president talks about taking the oil fields, having ExxonMobil talks about they owe us a lot of money, if you will, exploiting that particular resource. And the Secretary of Defense and others in the administration have only talked about it in terms of preventing ISIS from getting the oil fields, which is an important nuance as one practically, politically, strategically, and legally tries to ascertain whether the United States could actually do that.
Right, something we'll be watching in the months ahead. All right, retired U.S. Army Colonel Jeff McCausland. Colonel, thanks very much.
Thank you, Elaine.